Um, Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We are about to begin our session titled Skewed History, How History Dies in the Syllabus. Please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silence mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion. We would appreciate if complete silence is observed while the session is in progress. Our moderator for this session is Bela Raza Jameel, and our speakers for the session are Qasim Aslam, Abbas Hussain, Nawal Usman, and Anam Zakaria. Bela Raza Jameel is the CEO of Idara-e Talim-o Agahi. She is also a public policy specialist. She leads the citizen-led assessment and accountability initiative, which is called the Annual Status of Education Report Pakistan. She is also the founder of the Children's and Teachers Literature Festivals in Pakistan. She is the managing trustee of the Sanjan Nagar Public Education and Trust and also works on the National Coalitions on Education and Child Rights. Bela, over to you.
Thank you very much. Is it on? I don't think so.
Hello, hello. Sound system, please check.
Is it on? Yes. There's something terrible going on.
In case somebody's asleep, this should sort it out.
Well, good evening everyone. मुझे बहुत खुशी है कि इस सेशन में मुझे चुना गया इस moderation के लिए, and especially with such eminent panelists who are here. Panelists who are also activists in a very important area of work that we are going to be discussing. And it's also a subject, and I think अगर आप लोगों में से कोई थे हमारे अभी जो opening session हुआ जिसमें आयशा जलाल बात कर रही थी, she was one of the keynote speakers. So I think it's sort of in a way it created a great foundation for this session. And the session is titled, as you know, Skewed History, How History Dies in Syllabus. Or I think Aisha said something very profound and very obvious, that in a Praetorian state such as Pakistan, where the military has held power and where the construction of the state or the nation state since 1947 has been a lot of hard work, where is the space for history in the syllabus? And of course, history, as it has been defined, or this whole business of crafting history, has been within the framework of the Islamic State and of also the nationalizing of history within the Islamic State. तो एक issue बहुत मुश्किल बन जाता है. मगर in the conversations that I was having, and I will introduce all four of these eminent panelists that we have, but I was saying let's frame this session. What do we really mean when we say history in syllabus? And I think some of you may remember or may not even know about it, but in 1972 somewhere Pakistan and history teaching went along, but in 72 there was a huge disruption. The disruption was not only on account of East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh, but also on account of the fact that there was a decision by the state that there will be no more teaching of history. That in fact history will now be replaced by Pakistan studies. I don't know how many of you know about that. So when that happened, we started to look at a new rewriting of history and history textbooks, and this became a very serious state enterprise. And then this went along, and of course we went through the different types of governments, from Bhutto to Zia, and people often say that Zia caused the maximum damage to this business, but I think really in 72 when the decision was to finish off history, just like that, I think the damage had been done. And Zia just went on to build on that damage. And we went that kept happening till 2005-6, when there was a discussion, and the discussion happened again after a seminal piece of work. Lots of people had been writing कि मसला क्या है और हम हिस्ट्री को पाकिस्तान में इतना बायस और बिगेटरी क्यों पढ़ाई जाती है. और उसमें जब SDPI की एक किताब छपी H नैयर और सलीम की, तो उसके बाद जो सारा सबवर्जन के ऊपर हाउ आर टेक्स्ट बुक्स बीइंग यूज्ड फॉर सबवर्जन, तो बहुत बहस मुबाहिसा होने लगा और बहुत सारे लोग उसी के कंट्रीब्यूटर्स थे, जिसमें आयशा जलाल भी थी, रुबीना सहगल भी थी, बहुत सारे लोग टेक्स्ट बुक्स का एनालिसिस कर रहे थे. तो उसके अंदर ये एक बहस चलती रही till it was decided in 2002 there was a review of the curriculum, and in 2004-5 there was a decision, and in fact Aisha was asked if we were to revive history, would you participate? So these are vignettes of my own, because I was working in the Ministry of Education at that time, and the curriculum wing asked her and she said, with pleasure, I would be very much like to participate in the creating a new framework for history in a modern sense. Sadly, that was not to be. The ISI General was made the Minister of Education, and he said, what rubbish. We will, and there was an embarrassment also because कुछ ना कुछ compromise भी करना था. तो उन्होंने ये फैसला किया कि हम हिस्ट्री को रिवाइव करेंगे, मगर ऐसे प्राइमरी में, ताकि आप लोग को फ्रेम समझ आ जाए in which we will discuss. प्राइमरी क्लासेस में और अपर प्राइमरी में सोशल स्टडीज़ पढ़ाई जाएगी. ये 2005 और 6 का फैसला था. और मिडिल ग्रेड्स में पढ़ाई जाएगी हिस्ट्री और ज्योग्राफी 6th, 7th और 8th में, और 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th में पाकिस्तान स्टडीज़ पढ़ाई जाएगी. तो उनसे सवाल पूछा गया कि अरे ये क्यों, यानी कि हिस्ट्री के बाद मतलब 8वीं के बाद क्यों नहीं पढ़ाई जाएगी? क्यों? उन्होंने कहा कि पहले आप एंशंट हिस्ट्री पढ़ाएंगे और उसको मुगल्स तक ले जाएंगे, फिर आप 7वीं में मुगल्स हिस्ट्री की बात करेंगे, और फिर फाइनली आप बात करेंगे द लीड अप टू द इंडिपेंडेंस, और उसके बाद हिस्ट्री ख़त्म हो जाती है. उसके बाद आप फिर पाकिस्तान स्टडीज़ पढ़ाएंगे. ये फ़ैसले हुए, और ये जब फ़ैसले हो गए तो उसके बाद एक हरी किताबें लिखी गईं. इसलिए आपको दिखाना चाहती हूँ कि ये इस तरह की किताबें थी 2006 की लिखी हुई, जिसमें ये फ़ैसला किया गया कि हिस्ट्री कैसे पढ़ाई जाएगी 6ठी, 7वीं, 8वीं में, या पाकिस्तान स्टडीज़ कैसे पढ़ाई जाएगी, या सोशल स्टडीज़, और चल सो चल. एंड दिस वाज डन इन सम वेज नेशनल करिकुलम ऑफ एजुकेशन रिसर्च ट्रेनिंग इंडिया की टेक्स्ट बुक्स उस वक्त रिवाइज़ की जा रही थी, तो उनको भी देखा, कुछ चीज़ें उधर से ली, कुछ चीज़ें इधर से ली. मगर ये तो बात रही कि ऑफिशियल नेशनल करिकुलम कैसे बनता है. But then we come to the whole business of how then history is then transacted in the classrooms, not just at the level of schools and syllabi at the school level, but obviously also at the post-secondary and the tertiary level. So history in Pakistan has traveled this journey. Now we are very fortunate today that we have with us Dr. Nival Usman, who is a Karachi-based historian. She has a doctorate in South Asian history from Trinity College, Cambridge, and her research interests are in impact of colonial rule, the partition of 1947, and the effects of decolonization, especially with respect to Punjab. She is currently Assistant Professor of History in the Department of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts at IBA in Karachi. We have also Anam Zakria, who is an author, development professional and educationist based in Pakistan. Her first book, Footprints of Partition, Narratives of 4 Generations of Pakistanis and Indians, explores the changing perceptions regarding the 1947 partition on both sides of the border. The book was shortlisted for the German Peace Prize in 2016. She is now writing a second book exploring the impact of the Kashmir conflict on ordinary Kashmiris living across the LOC in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And inshallah that book will come out in 2017. She is head of programs for Code for Pakistan. She also teaches sociology and development studies and is a student of psychotherapy and with special interest in trauma and healing. Abbas Hussain साहब को तो कौन नहीं जानता, और his interest is in literature and has a lifelong passion for the best thoughts in the best of words. He inspires so many in Pakistan and across Pakistan and beyond Pakistan. And his passion is to be able to see how he can unlock the motivation in teachers, and he loves Shakespeare and feels that it is important to look at classic literature in the contemporary genre and to see how that can be revived in the conversations that take place in the classroom. So particular focus on teachers and unlocking the power of teachers. Qasim Aslam, again an amazing young leader, a former TEDx speaker and Acumen Fellow. He's a social entrepreneur and has traveled over 30 countries for training, speaking engagements, workshops, conferences, and sports competition. He's known for the work they did, the pioneering work on the History Project, which is an innovative dual narrative approach to history that encourages students in their formative years to question the narratives of hatred being fed to millions through history textbooks by understanding the duality of perspectives on various events. The latest publication, Partition Histories, The Other Side of Your Story, was launched at Harvard, and the program has now been taken up by top schools in Lahore, Karachi, Mumbai, Delhi, Islamabad. बहुत कुछ कह सकते हैं, मगर ये है कि ये इनका जो काम है वो ब्राउन यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में, ब्राउन में, हार्वर्ड में, स्टैनफोर्ड में, it's received a tremendous response and also in the media from around the world. So we are truly blessed today to have these speakers talk about a very important subject, I think, which desperately needs, and as Aisha says that as we look at the 70th year celebrations of 1947, still fractured, still trying to reconstruct, this is a very critical conversation. Perhaps now, if not now, when will history be resurrected? Not die in the syllabus, but be resurrected. However, to start a conversation, it is important that we are looking at the whole issue of history as high history. Who interprets that history, and how does it get translated, and how does it get transacted inside the classrooms? How does a child begin to engage, as the youth begin to engage with the business of history and its importance? Is it a rubbish subject, or is it an important subject as Pakistani citizens try to engage more boldly with the enterprise called Pakistan? I will start with this round of questions, and I would like to start off with perhaps starting off with Anam and see how Anam, what your take is on this, because this is where we stand today. And in your work, we would like to hear each one of you from where you are working in your different projects and your passions of how you see this being resurrected.
Firstly, thank you so much for the generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for being here as well. See, I grew up in the 1990s, actually. So I grew up in a time when India and Pakistan, to start off with, were in a very conflictual kind of relationship. The Kashmir issue was burning. And as a young child, I remember, I would sit in front of the TV and I would hear that Kashmir bulletin that would run after primetime news at 9 o'clock. And that's the first kind of memory I have of learning about history. And then I would go to my classroom, and those same, I would say, very jingoistic narratives would keep getting re-entrenched and reiterated. So I grew up kind of very much confused about who I was, but very sure about who I was not. And I think that's a problem in Pakistan. So when we start off with this discussion on why is history important and who we are and why we are so scared in a sense of engaging with our history, I think it comes from a sense of not being able to define ourselves in terms of who we are, but being able to define ourselves in terms of who we are not. And when you make that kind of distinction, then it becomes very important to cut off from certain parts of our own history. So in the 1970s, what you see is a complete kind of revamp. I wouldn't call it history at all, I would call it ideology. And it starts with Muhammad bin Qasim, it's a linear journey. Everything before that is impure, infidel, and you can't talk and it's a clean break and you just move on. Now when we talk about resurrecting history, right, and so many people are talking about it all over Pakistan, this discourse, we know there's a need to change it. And even when we make changes, it's important to understand that the syllabi does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within the larger mainstream discourse of society, right? And in history, whether it's high history, whether it's oral history, whether it's micro perspectives, they all inform each other and get entrenched. So when we talk about how we interpret history, I think it's really important to understand where are the teachers coming from. What are the different sources of history, because it's not just in the textbooks. So for me, I think oral histories have been really important, what you hear from your family. But even that gets shaped by high history. So I would make the argument that personal memories are no longer just personal memories, they're also kind of changed or manipulated based on the state narrative. So memory is very fluid and it gets censored over time. It changes over time. So the stories that come forward sometimes, are what kind of get reinforced by the state or by the high narrative in society. Then you go to school, the same syllabi is there, and then the teachers are studying from the same history sources. So even when the text changes, the attitudes don't, and the discourse remains the same within class. That is the problem.
Thank you very much, Neval. I'd like to move on to Neval, because again, this has been an issue, in what you have been looking at, because you work at the tertiary level and you have students who come to there searching for something. And I think this has been very well problematized. The way we look at official history, it is that which is high state history. There's no space for mediating with what is seen as the history of ordinary mortals in Pakistan, the stories they hear, the oral stories. How do you cope with this?
I think, so I teach university level students, and so one of the courses that I teach freshmen is called Introduction to Historical Methods. And it may sound like a boring course, but sorry, can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. Actually, what the course does is that it starts off by asking a very sort of basic question, which is, what is history? And the short answer to that question is, history is a version of the past. And that kind of breaks sort of, the concept of history down, because when you say it's a version of the past, then the next question is, whose version of the past? And when you say whose version of the past, then you're opening up the possibility of a multiplicity of narratives. So there's the Indian version of the past, there's the Pakistani version of the past, there's the state narrative, obviously the state version of the past, and then, as Anam very rightly pointed out, there is the memory, the individual memory of, normal people, which is history from below. So when you introduce history like that, which I'm assuming is not taught at the primary level or the secondary level, it really does make the students sit up, And then you teach Pakistan studies essentially by asking them a lot of questions, which is basically a way of sort of, bringing their prejudices, asking them to look at their prejudices very closely. So, just sort of one or two lines on the nature of history, which is something that I enjoy sort of dissecting in front of my students. History as a subject is what you call epistemologically fragile. By that, and I essentially mean that history is looking at something which is absent. It's studying the past. The past has definitively gone, and we have to construct a version of the past using limited sources and traces, what you call primary sources. So a letter that Jinnah wrote to Mountbatten, for example, or some correspondence between Liaquat Ali Khan and Jinnah. And we're constructing a story out of it, almost like someone making a puzzle, And so when you present history that way, you have to understand that sort of history can never be a complete version of the past. It is a fragmented version of the past. And it is that sort of fragile nature of history that makes it particularly susceptible to misuse or appropriation. By who? By the state, by politicians, by political parties. For what reason? To legitimize their rule, to gain legitimacy for a particular party, in order to popularize dissent, to organize themselves. It is basically the task of creating identities.
Thank you very much. And I think in that sense, this kind of it opens up the space And I think that's what I think is being done very powerfully in some tertiary institutions. But sadly, inside the classrooms, up till grade 10 or 12, history remains extremely stifled or extremely skewed. We have, with us people from the history project and people who've been trying to look at it from the perspective of the children and to see how is this us versus them going to be addressed on both sides of the border. So many of us have been people, especially on this panel, are preoccupied with how 1947 has been interpreted and post-colonial states. It'll be very interesting to hear what the history project has to offer and mediate in this kind of conversation that we are having right now.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much for the generous introduction and the context. I think there are two main parts that we have been increasingly been concerned with. One was what Nabal was just pointing out, how history is not just a reality. It's not a depiction of the past. It's a perspective. It's a perspective by the person writing it. And when about 3 years ago, when we started off कि हम लोग क्या कर सकते हैं इस बारे में, तो मसला तो था कि आप क्या सारी हिस्ट्री बता सकते हैं आप बच्चों को? क्या you tell everyone every second of what happened? All of you people sitting here, अगर आप लोग वापस जाके बताएं कि इस कमरे के अंदर क्या हुआ था, तो यहाँ पर 15 डिफरेंट कहानियाँ आ जाएंगी और वो सब ठीक होंगे. एंड दैट इज़ द फंडामेंटल प्रॉब्लम जो कि क्लासरूम के अंदर हम लोग मैथ्स प्रोड्यूस करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं एजुकेशन को. इस मसले को कैसे सॉल्व किया जाए? क्या ये मसला सॉल्व हो भी सकता है कि नहीं हो सकता? और हम लोग, और दूसरा मसला ये था कि मैं एक टेक्नोलॉजी एंटरप्रेन्योर हूँ. मेरा को फाउंडर जो था वो उन्होंने पॉलिटिकल साइंस पढ़ी हुई थी. हम लोग हिस्टोरियन भी नहीं थे. हम लोगों ने कहा एक किताब लिख दें एक और, तो हमें सीरियस कौन लेगा और क्यों लेगा? तो हमने कहा अच्छा नहीं लिखते. हम लोगों ने सिंपल सा एक काम किया. हमने पाकिस्तानी वर्जन ऑफ द सेम इंसिडेंट्स हिस्ट्री में से पकड़ के इंडियन वर्जन्स ऑफ द सेम इंसिडेंट्स फ्रॉम देयर टेक्स्ट बुक्स पकड़ के उनको हमने साइड बाय साइड एक किताब के अंदर डाला और हमने कहा बच्चों के पास लेके चलते हैं, देखते हैं क्या होता है. और तब बहुत मज़ा आया. बच्चे बहुत अच्छे होते हैं, वो हर किस्म का सवाल करते हैं, मन के सच्चे होते हैं. उनको नहीं होता डर, उनको नहीं होता आप कौन है, उनको नहीं होता वो कहाँ है, वो आपसे पूछते हैं. और जब उन बच्चों के पास हम लोग ये दोनों नैरेटिव्स एक ही चीज़ के बारे में लेकर गए, तो बच्चों ने कहा ये क्या है, ये तो गलत है. हमने कहा कैसे गलत है? वो कहते हैं कि जी ये तो हमारी किताबों में डिफरेंट लिखा हुआ है. हमने कहा जी ये दूसरी किताबें उनमें ये लिखा हुआ है. हम पाकिस्तान में भी गए, हम इंडिया के स्कूलों में भी गए. तो उन्होंने कहा कि अच्छा तो इनके ऑथर नहीं ठीक. हमने कहा जी तो मतलब आपके ऑथर कैसे ठीक? और ठीक क्या होता है? तो ये सवाल हमने क्लासों के अंदर जब करना शुरू किए तो बच्चों ने हर किस्म के सवाल पूछना किया और हम लोगों को एक चीज़ का अंदाज़ा हो गया कि जवाब पुराने हो जाते हैं, सवाल दे स्टैंड द टेस्ट ऑफ टाइम. दूसरा मसला जो हम लोगों ने क्लास के अंदर देखा, and that is not just restricted to the discipline of history, that perhaps our entire education system is a slave of, which is that the assessment system fundamentally drives what is going to happen inside a classroom. अगर एक बच्चा जो कि किताब के अंदर लिखा है, अगर उससे कुछ भी मुख्तलिफ लिख कर आ जाए एग्ज़ाम के अंदर, तो उसको उसका उस्ताद नहीं, उसको पूरा सिस्टम कहता है कि तुम गलत हो. और वो कैसे कहता है? वो उसके नंबर काट लेता है. नंबर काटने से उसको कल को नौकरी नहीं मिलती, कल को उसको एडमिशन नहीं मिलता. पूरा सिस्टम उसको कहता है तुम गलत हो. और कुछ अरसे बाद बच्चा कहता है हाँ मैं गलत हूँ, ये किताब के अंदर जो है ये ठीक है. सो perhaps it's not just the discipline of history that's a slave to this problem that the assessment system is bringing to the table. It's a bit of both. And in the interest of time, I'll cut it short. And so we've came across some very interesting ways where we ended up trying to solve this problem of the classroom where the child is just no longer interested. How do we make education interesting for this child so that he he or she becomes interested in engaging with education. And that's what we're applying in different classrooms right now.
I think that's an excellent segue,
Yes.
Qasim. And I think coming to Abbas, but I wanted to quickly just connect this. You have actually an excellent book, for example, Class 5 Social Studies book in Sindh, actually. Written by actually Bernadette Dean, who was then, she was hounded and had to leave Pakistan overnight for writing an excellent textbook. We have, on the other hand, also the business of examinations and how do you teach to the test. And so we have a range of textbooks interpreting the national curriculum as it comes. But the issue is, what magic can the teacher perform? Or what deadly sins that the teacher can inflict on the children, that the children get so afraid that they are silenced, as Krishna Kumar says. They come so happy to schools and then they are silenced very quickly. What magic can we do, Abbas Hussain? And how have you seen teachers who are completely know the art of silencing children to know how to make them bloom?
My God.
And
If I had known the answer to,
in the business of history.
it is. But if I've been known as the magician who does various things, but today you are asking for a miracle. Thank you very much for this very generous introduction, and to be on a panel with young people, and immediately it makes me recognize there are good many events these young people are analyzing were very many things which I was present at and I was able to remember and see and at least remember reading the newspaper events of. I happened to be in East Pakistan, later Bangladesh. I saw the 1971 events very close. I saw them from that side of the part of the country when it was a part of the country, and then we shifted over to this part, and then we saw the way the narrative managed to justify all that. That's a complete. But let me shift straight away to my work. I'm Abbas Hussain, Director, Teachers Development Center, and my work is with teachers. And I immediately understand, while Qasim is being very soft on the issue, I believe the problem is not so much the quality or the lack of them in the textbooks. The issue is the enormous weightage the teacher gives to the textbook. A kind of an enslavement to the textbook, a kind of a freeze frame, which the teacher believes that everything written in the textbook ought to be regurgitated by the child in the note paper, in the examination answer, and then an examination system which fosters this kind of intellectual slavery. Very many stories come to mind, of which one weird sort of example is the textbook says, whenever it was published, that there are 2 oil refineries in Pakistan. And the teacher is conducting a class in the compound of the 3rd oil refinery of Pakistan, a school for the employees of the 3rd refinery of Pakistan. And the children wrote that there are 3 oil refineries in Pakistan. And the teacher said, no. You only have to write what is in the book. Exactly the point. At which a child said, Miss, to phir ye bahar kya hai? That sort of problem. My answer to this magic thing, I'm extremely glad that, okay, how history dies, how it can be resurrected. I would like to give a kind of a Scrabble keyword, a 7-letter word, well actually 8 letters, IDCOSINT, IDCOSINT. I would like this meeting to give you a set of strategies that just about any teacher, howsoever enslaved to the textbook, would be able to bring some kind of interest, engagement in the classroom. IDCOSIN and T. Identifying, distinguishing, classifying, ordering, synthesizing, inferring, transforming. No, this is not Bloom's taxonomy, though it sounds like it. Poor Bloom, I mean, he would be amazed at what people have done to it. Anyway, identifying, distinguishing, classifying, ordering, synthesizing, inferring, transforming. Right now, I just would like to take a look at the first one, identifying. Any text at all, and children can be asked to identify the major players in it. and then of course go deeper and ask whose point of view is it. And just that opens a window to the kind of thing we call critical thinking. The word critical thinking is very much bandied around, but here is the alphabet of it, the stepstones of it. Distinguishing, classifying, ordering, synthesizing. Synthesizing is when I produce one text out of two or more sources. Now, I have a cardinal faith in the innocence of children, something I share immediately with my colleagues here, that children have enormous innocence in which the truth prevails. It is my firm faith in human nature that presented with falsehood around however many layers you like, truth prevails on the human heart, on the innocent human heart. When children are provided a variety of perspectives, when children are provided a diversity of perspectives, when they see a diversity of narratives, you don't need to do much. You can be sure that they will navigate their way to that which is most coherent and therefore most true. On that note, I believe that we would be able to take the thing forward. Synthesizing, inferring, transforming. Inferring is when you read between the lines the attitudes of an author towards a subject from his choice of nouns and adjectives and adverbs. Those kinds of things, of course, these are hard. And transforming is changing the modality of the presentation from text to visual or from visual to text. In other places, I take 3 hours to explain these 7 words, but you people are super learners, so I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what are we afraid of? Are we afraid of the Sambaras of Mohenjo-daro? Are we afraid of the 10,000 years of history that this society, this country represents? Are we afraid of the multiple identities that Nawal just spoke about? But what do we do? Because there is this disconnect.
Huge disconnect.
Huge disconnect. What are your responses? And I think, again, whilst you are dealing with tertiary and you are dealing with people, in schools, what do we do? How do we make us, and especially our rulers, a business of the state? Yesterday, it said here, the CM approves formation of the Sindh Curriculum Authority. I mean, my God, we can have so many curriculum authorities and laws on new authorities, making the others die down, creating new ones. I mean, we've been in this business since God knows when. But what are we really afraid of when we talk about history, and especially in a country which is so enriched by history, and yet we are so in such a rush to say, Mehergarh, oh my God, what is that? Islamic civilization ka uske saath kya taalluk hai? What do we do? What do we do? What are we? We are here exploring that how it dies, but you are the magic makers, as I say, in your own fields. What can we do so that we are less afraid of history in this country?
I think if you ask the question, what are we so afraid of? At the heart of the agenda
Naval?
behind Pakistan study.
Sorry.
It seems as if the preoccupation behind coming up with the Pakistan Studies curriculum is essentially to gain some legitimacy, to give some legitimacy to the state, to understand why Pakistan came into being, how it came to being, and and as you said, this became more of a preoccupation after 1971 because there was a sort of a crisis of legitimacy. After the creation of Bangladesh, now there were more Muslims outside the boundaries of Pakistan than there were inside Pakistan, within South Asia. And so there was more of a need to sort of look towards the West, by that I mean towards the Arab world, rather than sort of to draw cultural similarities with what was lying to the east of Pakistan. And I think that is where sort of the preoccupation with only picking out Islamic periods of our history started, and glossing over anything that would involve looking at the sort of more synthetic flavor of South Asian history.
Thank you. And Anam, going back to this, I mean, we have similar things. This does not mean it's happening in Pakistan. Our cousins next door do exactly the same thing. They're equally afraid. And I know that Anam has been working on some of this, and I know, and Qasim also in his textbook, in this project, history project, But you know, what can be done? I mean, again, there is this pursuit of legitimacy by the state. But when will these citizens begin to encounter and engage with history? And what do we do?
Adding to what you just said, I think we also have to be careful when we're thinking about censorship, right? Because not everything is censored. So of course the non-Islamic usually is, but even within the non-Islamic, it is certain histories are more okay than other histories. So for example, I was recently in Kashmir, in this place over there, Sharda, which is a very, very ancient university and temple, which is Hindu, but has been reappropriated as Buddhist. You see the same thing in Taxila as well. So even archaeological sites, which are supposed to be kind of your symbol of history, evidence of history, get reappropriated. So I think that's something to be cautious about. But what the state allows and what it does not allow, and then what comes forward and how, because history is not factual. I think we all agree to that. It is an interpretation of that. So what interpretation we do allow. Now within, when you're working with children in school, what I did notice was that Sikh heritage of history is much more acceptable because of the politics and different relationships between Pakistan and the Sikh community, but Hindu is not. So I remember recently I was trying to do an exchange over Skype, and I asked my students, I said, there's a school in Mumbai and they want to talk to you and how can you be interested. And one student raised her hand and she said, I don't want to do it. So I said, why? What's the hesitation? And she said, I read in a Pak Studies book, and this is a high income school. This is not a government, not a low income school. So I read in a Pak Studies book that they're bad people. I don't want to talk to them. I said, okay, they often think we are bad people too, and how about we just give it a chance? And so we had this Skype interaction, and believe it or not, she was the first student who came up to me after I, exited the Skype call, and she said, when are we doing this again? So I said, what happened to you? You were all out, no, I don't want to do this. And she said, they like Bollywood too, and they like biryani too, So I think those small interactions kind of break through these rigid understandings of the other. And I've had so many experiences like that, whether it's virtually, whether it's going to India, whether it's bringing children over here, just having those micro-level interactions. I know it sounds cliche because we've been talking about it for years, but really nothing does miracle better than actually interacting with the other and then making up your mind.
So will the history project talk to the new Sindh Curriculum Authority, the progressive chief minister?
Oh, man. So I'm going to assume that question was never asked. But going back to the earlier question, I'd like to just quickly spend a couple of minutes on that. One was, what are we afraid of? I think there's the notion of the nation state is fairly recent in the context of, a couple of centuries or a couple of 100 centuries. And it's not just us or our neighbors next door. It's pretty much most nation states around the world that are struggling to define a coherent identity on the basis of imaginary boundaries that were recently drawn 150 years ago. It's not just us, it's not just Pakistan, it's not just India, it's not just Bangladesh, it's not just South Africa. It's most nation states around the world. And in their struggle to create or curate a coherent identity, lots of steps have been taken, whether it's through history or through the media or through gagging the media or through a variety of other steps. And perhaps that's the fear that's driving a lot of these actions, that's speaking to the fear. What can we do? And that's the part that I'm most excited about. Like I said, I don't come from a background where we were not running a school. I was never a teacher. I was an entrepreneur. I love to solve problems. But that also gave me the opportunity to completely rethink the entire system of education and then try something new out. And we were like, अच्छा यार ये बच्चे जो हैं ये चाहते क्या हैं? अगर ये क्लास में नहीं है, what would they do? And we actually chased a few children and saw कि वो क्या enjoy करते हैं. बच्चे activities enjoy करते हैं, बच्चे competition enjoy करते हैं, बच्चे chocolates खाते हैं, और बच्चे क्लास के अंदर रहना नहीं चाहते. हमने कहा ठीक है, हम सारे बच्चों को यही चीज़ देंगे और इसके थ्रू एजुकेशन डिलीवर करेंगे, इसी के थ्रू हिस्ट्री पढ़ाएंगे. हमने सोचा बच्चों को क्रिकेट के थ्रू हिस्ट्री कैसे पढ़ाई जा सकती है. हमने किया यूँ कि पार्टीशन ऑफ बंगाल 1905 वाली, हमने वो चैप्टर पकड़ा, इंडियन वर्जन भी पाकिस्तानी वर्जन भी। हमने बच्चों की 30 बच्चों की क्लास थी, 27 बच्चे एक तरफ कर दिए, 3 बच्चे एक तरफ कर दिए, क्रिकेट टीमें बना दी, हमने कहा खेलो। 27 बच्चे एक साथ फील्डिंग कर रहे हैं, 3 बच्चों की टीम उनके खिलाफ खेल रही है, बच्चे हार गए, माइनॉरिटी टीम हार गई। फिर उसके बाद रस्सा कशी करवाई हमने, 3 बच्चे बेचारे खिंच के ज़मीन पे आ गए। बच्चे, फिर हमने कहा आपका फेवरेट बॉलीवुड हीरो कौन है? माइनॉरिटी टीम ने कहा कैटरीना कैफ, उनकी हीरोइन है फेवरेट। मेजॉरिटी टीम ने कहा कि नहीं जी हमारी तो शाहरुख खान है। हमने कहा अच्छा चीख के बताओ, जिसकी आवाज़ आ गई वो जीत गया। दोबारा से मेजॉरिटी टीम के पॉइंट्स बढ़ी जा रहे हैं, बढ़ी जा रहे हैं, बढ़ी जा रहे हैं। एंड देन वंस दे वर डन विद दीज एक्टिविटीज़, वंस द मेजॉरिटी टीम वन, दैट्स व्हेन वी टोल्ड देम this is how the minorities in your country feel. This is how their voice gets drowned out. How do you link it back to... And how do you link it back to history? Partition of Bengal 1905, इंडिया की महाराष्ट्र की टेक्स्ट बुक्स में लिखा हुआ है कि that was the most treacherous thing that happened. क्योंकि हिंदू मेजॉरिटी प्रोविंस का एक हाफ ऑल ऑफ अ सडन हिंदू माइनॉरिटी प्रोविंस बन गया था और वहाँ पे मुस्लिम्स को एक्सेस टू जॉब्स मिल रही थी। पाकिस्तानी किताबों में लिखा हुआ है कि वो तो बहुत बेहतरीन काम हुआ था, मज़ा ही आ गया था। ठीक है, तो गलत कोई भी नहीं है, इट्स जस्ट अ मैटर ऑफ वेयर यू फोकस, एंड दिस इज हाउ एक्सपीरियंशियली वी टीच चिल्ड्रन हाउ टू लर्न हिस्ट्री एंड हाउ टू एम्पथाइज विद बोथ पर्सपेक्टिव्स।
Thank you.
Now, very.
Abbas, very quickly, and then we'll open to the audience for Q&A. But very quickly, so in terms of, how do you get teachers to overcome this fear of history, of civilization?
In some of my workshops, I speak to a prominently rather 100% Muslim group of teachers, and I say to them, we speak about interfaith sorts of things. How about some intra-faith conversations? And that immediately makes them, everyone go nervous, and I say, wait, just a moment. I want to try it by recipe and foods. I said, have you noticed that every home or every family has their own recipe for kheer? And they said, yeah. I said, have you noticed only your own house, the house kheer is proper. Other people's kheer has either too much rice, too much sugar, too much. And they said, yes. I said, now isn't that interesting? How do these various kheers come about? How does a family have a tradition? And they said, well, नानी अम्मा से जो हमारे चला आ रहा है, हम इसी तरह पकाते हैं, हम इसी तरह सीखते हैं. I said, right, exactly. Couldn't that be a darn good reason why so many of us have these various ways of doing things? And why on earth would one be any better? Or it's a matter of taste, it's a matter of delight, and it's a matter of appreciating. So a whole line of thought would. And perhaps taking it a bit more philosophically, you use the word focus. That's exactly what I was thinking of. In fact, I have it written over here. The word attention. I believe that the question lies into what we pay attention to. What I pay attention to, my teacher tells me, my attention is a reflection of my intention. मेरी तवज्जो मेरी नियत की अक्कासी करती है. What I pay attention to is reflecting my intention. If my intention is to show superiority, to show pride, to show arrogance, I will see the other as small, as insignificant, as unworthy. But if my intention is to honor, to respect the other, then I will see the other closer, better form. It is actually then a matter of attention. And attention is actually, once again, attention is directed outward, intention is inward. And attention and intention balance each other, and there lies the whole crux. I believe that any kind of falsified history will prevail if we teach our people not to pay attention to what is just around them. And the moment we do pay attention around them, picking up on an earlier sentence you'd mentioned earlier, I believe history is all around us. I believe historical architecture is all around us. What happens is we fail to see it. So it is in that act of seeing that our revival and our cherishing, or indeed rejoicing, will be possible.
Thank you so much. We have now the floor open for question and answers. We've got lots of food for thought. And there was one gentleman, so I saw 3 hands, but I saw that hand go up first. And I won't forget the background choice, and I won't forget this one. So please, your naam.
मेरा नाम आतम प्रकाश है,
जी.
मैं हिंदू कम्युनिटी से बिलोंग करता हूँ. बात ये कि हमें अपने बच्चों को सजेशन भी सवाल में समझाना ही पड़ेगा. हमें क्यों लगता है कि इंडिया और पाकिस्तान के दोनों के तरफ के जो आवाम है उनके बीच में डिस्प्यूट है, उनके बीच में नफरत है, उनके बीच में लड़ाई है. मेरे ख्याल में जो क्रिकेट मैच आपने बच्चों को सिखाया कि ऐसा हो सकता है कि दोनों मुल्कों की आर्मी के जो अफसरान हैं, एक्सपीरियंस हमारे लोग हैं, दोनों मुल्कों के जो पार्लियामेंटेरियंस हैं, जो दोनों मुल्कों के जो मिनिस्टर्स हैं, क्या इस तरह का कोई सेशन स्काइप पर आप उनके लिए नहीं रख सकते ताकि वो लोग अवेयर हों कि असल प्रॉब्लम और बायलॉज जो बनते हैं वो ऊपर लेवल पर बनते हैं, हमारे ऊपर इम्प्लीमेंट होते हैं. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, बात हुई इंटरफेथ की. मैं रमज़ान, ईद, सारे सेलिब्रेशन आपके त्यौहार करता हूँ, लेकिन आप लोग अपने बच्चों को हमारे करीब नहीं आने देते और आप लोग हमारे अपने बच्चों को हमको इस तरह पेश करते हैं कि हमको मुँह से दौड़ों की तहजीब है, हमें बुक्स में पढ़ा जाए, करीब से ना देखा जाए.
बहुत अच्छा. अगर सवाल हो तो बहुत अच्छा होगा, अगर कमेंट हो उसको छोटा रखिएगा. इसमत पहले एंड देन जी, और अगर किसी से हो खास पैनलिस्ट से तो प्लीज़ बता दीजिएगा किससे होगा.
I just want to ask all the panelists sitting here, who is writing our history? Because the 2006 curriculum that was made in the syllabus for history is according to the modern methodology. And private publishers like Oxford were asked to also write textbooks for it. And because I wrote for Oxford, and my books are called Understanding History for classes 6, 7 and 8. And now most schools in Pakistan are adopting them. And they are the most objective, unbiased look at history. And the only, so I would like you, who is writing our history? For the national curriculum, for our public schools, do we ever get down to that with these 2 young ladies sitting there, right, for school textbooks? That's what we have to do.
I think that merits a quick answer because it's a very important question. Who will write those textbooks, or who is writing? Ji, Nival.
Well, just one clarification. I teach at the university level, so the books that we mostly use are written by international. They're not books. I take chapters from books by internationally renowned historians. So that would be Aisha Jalal, Gil Martin, Ian Tolbert, etc. Just one point that I'd like to clarify. جو میں نے شروع میں کہا, whose version of the past, etc. There is no such thing as unbiased history. I think that's the first sort of understanding with which you approach the subject. There is no such thing as an objective history. What you can do is to teach the student that before you start teaching them history, that there is no such thing as unbiased history.
Okay.
We'll come back to that question later, but I think the method of history is what I think Nival is pushing towards, because we forget that. And we'll come back to it. آپ کا سوال پہلے, and then there was one at the back.
میرا جواب نہیں دیا آپ لوگوں نے.
جی ابھی آ رہا ہے. Hold on.
پتہ چل گیا مینورٹیز میں نا.
نہیں ایسے نہیں.
ہمیں آج پتہ چلا کہ کیوں مینورٹیز میں ہے. میجورٹی وہ سچائی تو 3 والی بات ہے. آپ لوگ سچائی سے ہم 3 ہیں. میرا جواب پہلا حق بنتا تھا میرا, تو میرا ٹائم آپ کو نہیں آئے گا.
ٹیکنیکلی سر آپ کا سوال نہیں تھا, ایک کامنٹ تھا کہ پارلیمنٹیرینز کو گیم کھلوائیں. تو ہم سوری, ہمیں لگتا نہیں ہے کہ وہ گیم ہونے والی ہے.
پرکاش جی, آپ کی جو سوال, آپ کا جو کامنٹ تھا, وہ سب شاید اس سے ایگری کرتے ہیں یہاں پر. شاید ہماری خاموشی اس بات کی عکاسی. جی جی
آپ مجھے کہیں کہ ہم اس طرح کی کوششیں کریں گے نیکسٹ ٹائم دیوالی یا ہولی جب آنے والی ہے, آپ کہیں کہ ہم آپ کے ساتھ سیلیبریٹ کرتے ہیں, ہمیں بلائیں سب کو.
بالکل.
آپ کی بات دیکھیں, ان کا پلیٹ فارم ہے ادارہ ہے.
جی
ادارے کی تو نام میں ویٹ کرنے کے تیار ہوں.
میں آپ سے صرف 1-2 باتیں. ایک تو یہ کلیریفیکیشن کہ آپ کا کامنٹ تھا جس سے, جیسے ابھی قاسم نے کہا, ہم سب اگری کرتے ہیں. اور میں آپ سے ایک سوال, اور آپ نے یہ کہا کہ کیا آپ کی گیمز جو ہیں, اور اس میں بھی میں بتا رہی ہوں کہ یہ ٹریک 2 چل رہی تھی, اس میں پارلیمنٹیرینز کا آنا جانا, ججز کا آنا جانا, یہ سب چلتا رہا. مگر کیا ہوتا ہے کہ جب ہماری ہائی اسٹیٹ ڈر ان کو لگ جاتا ہے کہ یہ بہت قریب آ رہے ہیں, اور پھر دروازے بند ہو جاتے ہیں. آپ نے یہ بہت دفعہ دیکھا ہوگا, نہ صرف یہ کہ لیکھک آ رہے ہیں جا رہے ہیں, مگر ایکچولی پارلیمنٹیرینز آ جا رہے ہیں, ٹیچرز آ جا رہے ہیں, سب کچھ ہو رہا ہوتا ہے, سیاستدان آ جا رہے ہیں, مگر پھر جب کوئی نئی گورنمنٹ آتی ہے وہ وہیں پہ دروازے بند ہو جاتے ہیں اس کے, مگر ہم چھوڑتے نہیں ہیں کیونکہ ہم اور آپ ہم ایک ہی اسٹرگل میں لگے ہوئے ہیں. اور ہم مثلاً اگر چلڈرنز لٹریچر فیسٹیول ہو رہا ہے, میرپور خاص میں کہا, میں نے کہا آپ مٹھی میں کروائیے. اور یہ ایک اور بات ہے کہ اس طرح کے فیسٹیولز جو ہیں یہ ایک طرح سے اس کو سبورٹ کر رہے ہیں. یہ جو فیصلہ ہے کہ یہ ہر چیزیں کراچی میں ہوں گی یا ادھر ادھر ہوں گی, تو ہم نے کہا ہم مٹھی میں کریں گے کیونکہ وہاں کی ڈائیورسٹی کو ہم نے کبھی دیکھا ہی نہیں ہے. یہ ہونے والا ہے, ہم آپ کو اس میں دعوت دیں گے. تو آئی تھنک دا کوشچن از وی 100 جو آپ نے سوال پوچھا وی اگری وتھ یو, سو ویل کم بیک ٹو اٹ. اور اگر کوئی آپ کا سوال رہ گیا ہو تو پلیز پھر سے پوچھ لیں, مگر میں آپ کو یہ ریکویسٹ کروں گی کہ ایک صحت مندانہ رویہ رکھیں, کیونکہ یہاں پہ جو بھی لوگ بیٹھے ہیں وہ واقعی میں بلیو کرتے ہیں کہ پاکستان جو ہے وہ سب کا ہے. ٹھیک ہے نا. دیر واز اے کوسچن ایٹ دا بیک, اور ان کو پلیز سوال کرنے دیجیے. اور اپنا
انیف دلمراد میرا نام ہے.
اچھا.
میں جرنلسٹ اور ریسرچر ہوں,
جی.
اور میرا ایکسپرٹیز ہے کراچی اور بلوچستان کے کوسٹل بیلٹ پہ. تو میں نے یہ دیکھا کہ پہلے پرائمری کے سبجیکٹ میں یہ تھا, اس میں سلیبس میں شامل تھا منگو پیر کا میلہ. تو جب ہم نے اس پرائمری کے زمانے میں اس کو پڑھا تو بڑا مزہ آیا. لیکن اس کے بعد ہم یہ دیکھتے ہیں کہ میں خود ایز اے ریسرچر ہوں, تو میں نے دیکھا کہ کراچی میں برج کا کھوٹ ہے, فورٹ آف برج ہے, اور منگا پیر کا جو فیسٹیول ہوتا ہے لوکلی اس کو جو نا لوگ جاتے ہیں پارٹیسپینٹ کرتے ہیں, اس کو منایا جاتا ہے, اور بالکل ہی انٹرنیشنلی بہت ہی ڈفرینٹ وہ ایک میلہ ہے. اور تیسرا یہ کہ یہ کیرتر کے پورے رینج میں مختلف کلچرز اور مختلف میلے ملتے. تو میرا سوال یہ ہے کہ اگر پاکستان اور ہندوستان کی جو 47 سے پہلے کی جو تاریخ ہے اس میں جو سبجیکٹ میں سلیبس میں اس لیے ڈالا نہیں جاتا ہے کہ اس میں بہت سارے مسئلے ہیں, لیکن ہمارے جو لوکلی بہت سارے کلچرلی بہت سارے چیزیں, ہسٹوریکل بہت سارے ایونٹس ہیں, ان کو کیوں شامل نہیں کیا جاتا, بلکہ شامل کرنے کی بجائے بہت سارے سلیبس میں وہ شامل تھے ان کو نکال دیا گیا ہے. منگا پیر ان کی سب سے بڑی مثال ہے.
بالکل یہی آئی تھنک اگر کوئی سوال اس کا جواب دینا چاہ رہا ہے, مگر ایک اور ہم سوال لے لیتے ہیں اور مے بی وی کین دین رسپونڈ. ایک سیکنڈ پہلے ان کا سب, ایک سیکنڈ, ایک منٹ پہلے وہ بہت دیر سے انتظار کر رہے ہیں, ورنہ یہ نہ کوئی کہے کہ بیک جو آخری رو تھی تو وہ بالکل رہ گئی. جی اب پھر میں آپ کے پاس آ.
دیکھیے پہلے تو آپ نے بولا کہ ڈر کس کا ہے, میرے خیال میں ڈر سچ سے ہم ڈر رہے ہیں, باقی اور کوئی بات نہیں ہے. دوسری بات جو ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ یہ آپ ہسٹری کی جو بات کرتے ہیں, وہ آئی بلیم دی رائٹرز جو ہسٹری بک لکھتے ہیں. دیکھیں پارٹیشن میں نے 1940 کا جلسہ بھی اٹینڈ کیا تھا ایز اے چائلڈ, اور میں پارٹیشن کو ہم نے دیکھا اپنی آنکھوں سے. دیکھیں اس وقت 2 پارٹیاں تھیں پارٹیشن کے وقت, کانگریس زیادہ مسلم لیگ, دونوں کی پیپر جو ہیں وہ شائع ہو چکے ہیں, شروع سے لے کے آخر تک شائع ہو چکے ہیں. تو اگر ہمارے رائٹر جو ہیں وہ دونوں پیپر جو ہیں وہ نہیں پڑھ سکتے تو ہم کیا کر سکتے ہیں. اگر وہ صحیح ہیں تو وہ دونوں لے لیں, دونوں پیپر جو ہیں. اب جیسے آپ نے ذکر کیا کہ بھئی آپ کا پارٹی بنگال کی پارٹیشن, اس میں 3 فریق تھے, مسلم لیگ, کانگریس اور انگریز. انگریزوں کا ورژن جو ہے وہ اور ہے, پاکستان مسلم لیگ کا اور ہے, لیکن انگریزوں کا ورژن جو ہے وہ اس لیے زیادہ معتبر ہے کہ اس وقت وہ ان کا ایک حکومت کا یہ فیصلہ تھا کہ صوبہ اتنا بڑا تھا اس کو وہ کنٹرول نہیں کر سکتے. تو میرا مطلب ہے یہ بجائے اس کے کہ ہم کنٹروورسی میں جائیں, آپ کے پاس ساری ہسٹری موجود ہے. ابھی چھوٹی سی بات ہے, ہم لوگوں نے اس کو دیکھا نہیں ہے. دیکھیں قائد اعظم نے بولا تھا یونٹی, فیتھ اینڈ ڈسپلن. جب ضیاء اللہ کا آیا تو اس نے کیا کیا, فیتھ, یونٹی اینڈ ڈسپلن. کسی نے نوٹس کیا, کسی نے آ کے اس کو بولا کہ بھئی یہ غلط ہو رہا ہے.
جی جی کامنٹ ہے, ناٹ اے کویشچن. آپ کچھ کہنا چاہ رہے تھے, ایک لفظ کہنا چاہ رہے تھے. جی
آپ کی نیت اگر یہ ہے, جی جی اوکے,
जी,
Okay, I'll respond to
and I
that.
think
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
respond to that. And वो जो आपने अभी सवाल किया था, we'll come back to it because Ismat's question is also need
Yeah.
to be responded to
This
in a
gentleman,
minute.
yeah.
जी, अगर आप पहले
नहीं,
अच्छा,
आप बता.
जी, आखिरी वाला.
Yeah, बाकी मैं अभी जिक्र करने वाला.
जी,
Yes, we know about it.
के अजीज.
Yeah.
जी,
तो मैं अंडू कर रहा हूँ अपनी लर्निंग
जी.
बचपन से सीखा था.
जी.
लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन वाज पास्ड ऑन 24th मार्च. हमने पढ़ा 23rd मार्च. अब मुझे बताएं, सवाल ये है कि ओके सवाल जी, सवाल ये हमें पता तो है ये नैरेटिव बिल्ड कौन कर रहा है. दूसरा सवाल उस पे ही कि हम ये अब तक चेंज कर क्यों नहीं पाए नैरेटिव, इसके पीछे किसका हाथ.
Very good.
बहुत अच्छा सवाल.
K.K. Aziz was interviewed very many years later after that wonderful book of his, The Murder of History. We had a question from the floor about who is writing the history. K.K. Aziz gives the disgustingly true answer that a mafia of 6 people have produced those whole series of books. I mean, there is this. I mean, until 2006, after which the thing has opened up, and various other publishers are now free to produce books. So I understand. Sir, आपकी बात का मेरा मसला बड़ा simple है. As a human being, I have intention of having an identity. Okay. My choice of identity involves 2 things: that which I wish to be, and that which I wish to avoid being. So, I will construct a narrative in which I will show that which I wish to be positive, and that which I wish to be avoid being, to be negative, unworthy. This is how I create the other, this is how I demonize the other, and this is how I show that the other isn't worth looking at. But when I pay attention, I discover that the other is just as worthy, just as respectable as myself, and in that I get humility, and I'm able to understand, and therefore perhaps forgive my arrogance, get out of it, and understand the other person. That is the line I was taking, which creates a human society and a human culture, which is why I would have to study history.
I think it just once again raises this question that Neval said right at the beginning.
Right.
कि जो मेथड मैं क्या पढ़ाती हूँ कि मेथड ऑफ हिस्ट्री क्या है, एक टेक्स्ट को कैसे इंटरप्रेट करना है. एंड perhaps Anam, you want to say something?
I just want to comment over here because, you know, the way we're looking at history and teaching history, I think perhaps we need to broaden that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we're talking about texts and we have the documents, but what Pakistan has, not many nations do. We have a first generation still alive as walking talking sources of history.
Absolutely.
And I don't know why we don't, you know, consider that. And, you know, I don't think actually history is ever objective. I think it is very subjective. We're saying it's biased. When it's biased, then it has to be subjective. So why can't we, especially the state
Live with that.
historical
Yeah.
documents are so censored and so biased and so distorted, why not access the, you know, the micro level sources of that history?
But back to
Wonderful.
texts and textbooks and
But within
examinations and
textbooks.
assessments.
But just
Because,
to add, just
जी,
within textbooks as well, you know, in NCERT textbooks in India, Urvashi Bhattaria ji's Other Side of Silence, oral histories have been included and contextualized. So something like that.
at the moment Krishna Kumar went and Modi came, again they were slammed down. One last
I just wanted to.
जी, एक सेकंड जी.
कासिम गौरी गजनवी ये जो आ रहे हैं उनको जो उसको आप ख़त्म कराना पड़ेगा. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, ये कासिम गौरी गजनवी हमारे हीरो नहीं है, ये इस सब कॉन्टिनेंट के. नंबर 1. नंबर 2, नहीं मैडम, एक मिनट. जब मैं ये कह रहा था कि जब वो हिजरत हुई वहाँ से जो आने वाले थे वो तो वहाँ बहुत कत्ल गारत गिरी हुई, जो यहाँ से हिजरत हुई है इस शहर कराची से 23 लाख हिंदू कम्युनिटी गई है, तो यह भी कटमट के गई है. इसी तरह लाहौर से सिखों की कटिंग भी है. तो ये तारीख भी पढ़ाई जाए बच्चों को. ये जो हमने जनरल ज़िया का जो निज़ाम तालीम है उससे निजात पानी होगी जब हमारे नौजवान हिस्ट्री तैयार होगी.
इस वक्त कुछ कहना चाह रही थी and we had
I was
really
just saying
run
that
out of time.
when you do objective history, like in my book, when I talk about Mahmud of Ghaznavi, I give 3 perspectives. One, Romila Thapar's, one from the British historians who just say that he's an idol breaker, and our own. And he was a very different kind of a ruler who ruled all of Central Asia, etc., etc. So you can give children the perspective to be able to think on different levels. And the love of history comes from the teacher. And the teacher has to know her subject well and to be able to teach it through activity and engage the students.
And we've heard
Thank
a
you.
lot of that. And one last question there, and we have to respond to that question. बहुत important question. ये कहानियाँ कहाँ गई?
Okay, I don't know if it's a question per se, but like I just said, Anam said that okay, so personality is shaped by what has been taught to us by our parents initially. I don't think in our culture, in our part of the world, we are taught. Okay, we are fed on a we're fed a stable diet of romanticism, xenophobia, jingoism. We're not really encouraged to question.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, critical thinking, and it's not.
डरते हैं teachers
Yeah,
उससे
it's
भी,
not
ना?
just okay. So teachers के अलावा, it's your parents' responsibility to make you question, and also the media, the writers.
एक बहुत important, very well spoken. I think that's so important. कोई इसे disagree नहीं करेगा. मगर ये जो सवाल इन्होंने पूछा था कि मंगू पीर की कहानियाँ कहाँ गई, क्यों वो ले गई, उठा ले गए और फिर से वापस किताबें बिल्कुल ड्राई हो गई. हालांकि इसी जगह में हमीदा खुरो ने चिल्ड्रंस हिस्ट्री ऑफ सिंध, सारी ये किताबें लिखी हैं और बहुत सारी कहानियाँ ऐसी हैं जो कि एक हिस्ट्री को बहुत प्यारी तरीके से बच्चों को एक तरह से इनको इंट्रोड्यूस करता है. तो देर इज़ अ काउंटर movement taking place. Look at the history project, look at what Abbas, all of you are doing. There is a counter movement taking place. How do we, and this is a question that we really finish with, how do we as a whole society try to influence the state that the time is not to be afraid of history and the time is for stories and multiple stories to take root in the classrooms and discover the stories around us. Not just history from above, but also history from below. All these people are wonderful resource persons, and including yourself sitting there. We need to form a movement to be able to resurrect history the way it should be, so that it makes our children and our youth and adults far more comfortable in their skins. Thank you so much for being there. A big round of applause for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, people.